7th of July 1974, and the World Cup final in the Olympic Stadium in Munich. West Germany, the hosts and favourites to win, are up against the masters of total football, the Dutch. But in the most dramatic start to a World Cup final, West Germany already faced disaster.
30 folks with him. He may be the man to mark it. Right through and brought down. Penalty in the first minute of the World Cup, and rightly so. Takes it. 1-0. The goal scored after 80 seconds.
The first German player to touch the ball in the final is the goalkeeper, Sepp Maier, when he picks the ball out of the net.
Less than 2 minutes into the match and the Germans are already 1-0 down.
So, was machst du jetzt in diesem Moment?
Well, what do you do in such a moment? Actually, all you want to do is go home to mummy.
But German football has always thrived in the face of adversity.
There's a saying, you've only really beaten the Germans when they're in the shower.
Banned from international football after the Second World War, and with pitiful resources, they struggled for re-acceptance and recognition. But with determination and meticulous planning, even down to employing the founder of Adidas as their own personal bootmaker, the Germans brought about a miracle that restored national pride to a broken nation with the greatest upset in World Cup history.
As footballers, we're not as skilled as other countries, but as far as attitude and morale, we're still ahead of the rest.
Now, in 1974, no longer the underdogs and competing for the World Cup at home, can the German attitude and morale stand up to the ultimate test? Germany's extraordinary World Cup story begins in Switzerland in 1954. It was the first time since the war Germany had been allowed to enter the tournament.
We were not allowed to take part in '48 at the Olympics in London, not allowed to take part in 1950 at the World Cup in Brazil. So here we were, the Germans, beaten, bruised, but re-entering the stage for the greatest show on earth.
Divided after the war into East and West, this was the first ever West German team to qualify for the World Cup. It was against Turkey that the West Germans lined up in Berne for their first game of the tournament, but nobody was expecting much.
We were outsiders. I remember precisely that one could bet on any team in the bookmakers in London except on Germany. It didn't exist. One couldn't place a single bet.
It was only 9 years after the war, and Germany was consumed by poverty and guilt. Any sense of nationalism had been deeply buried, and football was well down the agenda. It was only because of one man that West Germany even had what they could call a national team. That man was Sepp Herberger. He'd been the national coach from before the war and was determined to rebuild his team.
Herberger was a great idealist. He was fanatically inspired by the reconstruction of his football team. He never got things in perspective.
Although not a Nazi, Herberger had influence in high places, which he had used to keep his team alive during the war.
They would get jobs not too dangerous, postings not too dangerous, so that they would kind of be kept together. And he had a master plan. He had a master plan that this German national team would make it in Europe.
Herberger's captain was Fritz Walter, the unquestioned star of German football. His skill and creativity as a goal-scoring midfielder was unrivaled. Herberger had successfully kept Walter from the front until the final stages of the war, when he was captured by the Russians. A prison guard recognized him as a football legend and spared him the dreaded fate of being sent to Siberia.
Fritz Walter was the number one for us. He was also the team captain. He was the long arm of Sepp Herberger. And when Fritz Walter played well, we all played well.
But Walter's war experiences left him scarred. Since catching malaria, he found it particularly difficult playing in hot conditions. It was well known that the worse the weather, the better Fritz played.
If it's raining all across Germany on football fields, people will say, they will look up to the skies, up to the rain, and will say, Fritz Walters weather, you know, dem Fritz sein Wetter.
But it was in distinctly un-Fritz Walter weather that the West Germans began their campaign in the 1954 World Cup.
Germany was there. That is what really mattered. You know, Germany took small spot, but at least a spot on the world stage.
However, against Turkey, things didn't begin well.
Here the Turks coming through the German defence, and it's Turkey hope is going 1-0 through Suez.
We had to win against the Turks. Unfortunately, we were 1-0 down in the first few minutes. But then we proved we were the better team.
They settle down. Now here's Schäfer calling for the ball. He comes through. Schäfer shoots a goal, 1-1.
They came back to win the game 4-1. It was a great start for the unfancied Germans, but their next encounter would be against Hungary, the magnificent Magyars. Unbeaten for 4 years and clear favourites to win the tournament, this was the golden generation for Hungarian football. The first footballing superpower to emerge from behind the new Iron Curtain.
It was a team with a mission, not only in football, but also in the Hungarian political life of that time. We, the football team, were the main breakout point for the Hungarian nation. And they were led by the legendary Ferenc Puskás, known as the Galloping Major.
Puskás had everything that a dream footballer really ought to have or wishes that he'd had. He pulled strings on and off the pitch.
A year earlier, in 1953, they had shocked the football world by beating a previously invincible England at Wembley in a thrilling 6-3 victory. England's rigid tactics were no match for the new football revolution from the East.
They had players who could read the game, so they would switch positions and they would alter the tactics on the field. They'd take a few minutes to work out the opposition and then adjust and blow them away.
The Hungarians' fluid and flexible style was years ahead of its time, a forerunner of the total football of the 70s. They reconfirmed their superiority when beating England again in the same year in Budapest, this time 7-1. Against such a formidable team, the West Germans would need a remarkable performance in Bâle. However, Herberger had hatched a cunning plan. He let Fritz Walter lead the team onto the pitch, but to the shock of the German supporters, he'd chosen to send out a side of mainly reserves. Puskás won the toss, and it seemed like an omen. The Hungarians showed no mercy, and by half-time, it was 3-1, with the Germans facing an uphill battle.
When a team hasn't lost a game for 4 years, or more than 4 years, across the whole world, then one thing is clear. Against such a team, you have to try and pull together and get through it as best you can.
But pulling together against the Golden Team wasn't enough. It was soon clear the German side was completely outclassed. They were thrashed by a humiliating 8-3.
8-3. like 8 goals that you allow. I mean, that defeat really confirmed you were an outsider. You were not there to win the World Cup. You're here to play the first round, and then we take it from there.
Although no one in Germany expected to actually beat the Hungarians, so shocking was the extent of the defeat that calls for Herberger's head rang out.
There was a storm of indignation that such a desperate team was fielded by the Germans. It was something which made people's blood boil.
Das war ja auch etwas, was das Volk in Wallung brachte.
But Herberger was unfazed as he rested most of his star players for a reason. Within the group, the defeat by Hungary left Germany on level points with Turkey, and, as Herberger had anticipated, this would mean a playoff to go through to the next round. It was all part of his master plan. He rode the criticism with a stream of characteristically ambiguous one-liners which would either baffle or charm.
I think he most probably added as many sayings to the German language as Goethe did. You know, there's all these famous statements like das Spiel dauert 90 Minuten, like the game lasts 90 minutes, or nach dem Spiel ist vor dem Spiel, which translates roughly to after the game is before the game. And it was all this like common sense. But when the common sense slipped out of his mouth, it sounded like an art.
Herberger silenced his critics when the team crushed Turkey 7-2 in the playoff. His plan had worked, and against all the odds, they were through to the last 8. And when they beat Yugoslavia in the quarter-final, German fans everywhere were ecstatic. They knew now that whatever happened, they could go home with their heads held high. They also knew the final was only 1 game away. But to get to the final, the Germans wearing dark shirts would have to beat the highly rated Austrians.
We gained more self-confidence in the game against Yugoslavia and said, now we're going into this game, we're going to win this game. We want to get to the final now.
Ins Endspiel kommen.
Scoring 2 goals and setting up 2 more, Fritz Walter inspired his team to destroy Austria 6-1.
They were completely devastated, and we were in the final. But I'm convinced it was all down to Sepp Herberger. We knew that it was he who had believed it was possible all along, and it was he who had told us how to achieve it.
And suddenly, you win against a team as strong as Austria, and we were in the final. It was so clear, and we were so happy. And everyone said, aha, the Germans are strong too. Only one team didn't understand this. That was Hungary.
Hungary had scored 25 goals on their way to the final, but that didn't dampen enthusiasm. Germany's success had caught the public's imagination back home. For the first time since the war, Germany had something to shout about.
Urplötzlich, was? Wir, die Deutschen?
All of a sudden, there was this sense of we the Germans, we identified with the team. Suddenly, an us feeling surfaced, an identification with football with this team, and there was corresponding excitement.
Und entsprechend war die Spannung.
Yes, how had we managed this after losing 3-8 only 2.5 weeks ago?
Gegen die 3-8 verloren haben.
4th of July 1954, the day of the World Cup final, and it was tipping it down. True Fritz Walter weather. Herberger knew that to stand any chance, he needed his captain to be on top form, so he was delighted. But he also had a secret weapon. He had recruited sports shoemaker Adi Dassler into his backroom team.
Adi Dassler had a really good idea. The studs would not be sort of nailed on as it was done back in those days, but rather you could screw them, which also meant you were able to react very quickly to changing weather conditions.
It only took a few seconds to take out the studs and quickly raise the boots. One stud was in, and then the next few, and then on with the match.
The teams lined up in front of 60,000 people in Berne, and back in Germany, several million were crowded around their radios, hanging on to every word spoken by commentator Herbert Zimmermann.
Deutschland im Endspiel der Fußball-Weltmeisterschaft. Das ist eine Riesensensation. Das ist ein echtes.
It was to be a game of extraordinary drama, one which would make Zimmermann a legend.
He says this is a proud day for Germany, this is a great day for our country, and we shouldn't be so arrogant to hope that we can actually win this game. It's you know, being here that is the wonderful thing. And I guess that was the general feeling at home.
The Germans had got further than they ever thought possible, but for the Hungarians this was the moment of truth.
Azt azért ki kell mondani, hogy ennek a mérkőzés.
Only one team had anything to lose in this match, and that was the Hungarian team. The Germans could only win.
A németek csak nyerhettek.
We were convinced of our ability. We talked amongst ourselves about the game. And we said we are going onto the pitch and we want to become world champions.
Once again, Walter and Puskás went head-to-head. And once again, Puskás won the toss. After just 6 minutes, Puskás went on to make his mark. Two minutes later, a setback became a disaster when a mix-up in the German defence left Hungary 2 up.
It's true that if a goal is scored against you straight away in the 6th minute, and then another one in the 8th, to go 2-0 down, it's already critical for a team. But we didn't let it get to us. We didn't stick our heads in the sand.
As coach Sepp Herberger looked on, it would be one of his phrases that inspired Fritz Walter to rally his team.
And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and Max, and then he said to me, "Don't worry." That's literally what he said. Always remember what Sepp keeps saying. When the 90 minutes are over, then we'll do the accounts.
With Fritz Walter driving them forward, it would only take 2 minutes for a new entry to appear in those accounts.
Von dort zu Rahn, Rahn und Tor! Tor für Deutschland! Tor! Es steht nur noch 2:1. 10 Minuten sind gespielt. Der Schuss von Rahn aus Linksaußenposition.
The swift German reply allowed them to gather momentum, and they now pressed on in the search for the equalizer. Cracks began to appear in the Hungarian defence as the Germans forced a series